Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Schizoid Quest. Today we have Fergazoid, which is an individual that reached out to me in order to answer a few questions regarding their lived experience as someone that deals with having schizoid personality disorder. And uh, what was I going to say? I basically have a batch of questions like I did last time for this person. I'm going to go through them. They are, if they're ever unwilling to answer a certain portion or a follow-up question, that is always allowed for future people that might want to do similar to what Fergazoid is doing here today. And the purpose of this, as I've mentioned, and I probably will continue mentioning every time, is to get a little bit more information about what it is like to deal with it, with the deal with schizoid personality disorder from the very people that actually have it, right? It's one thing to have a discussion with psychologists and therapists and things of that nature, which is also greatly important, but it's also just as important, if not more so, to get it from the source. Um, in any case, I'm just going to get started. I don't really think we need any kind of introduction because I think the questions themselves will probably answer it. So, um, without doxing yourself, what part of the world are you from?
I grew up in Texas and I live in the Pacific Northwest.
Cool. How long? And you live in the Pacific Northwest now, though, you said?
Yes, that's correct. For going on 8 years now.
Oh, okay. Prior to that, it was always Texas.
I grew up in Texas and I moved around to a few different
Mm,
places in the United States,
got it.
and I've been in Pacific Northwest.
All right. Sounds good. How did you find the channel, by the way? And why did you decide to do this?
How did I find the channel? Well,
Yeah.
I heard the term schizoid briefly mentioned in a podcast, and it sounded curious and compelling to me, and like it might just describe me. And so I started looking up information about it and researching it on YouTube, and an interview with you had come up. And I decided to do this uh, to get more experience with it, to get educated on it myself. It's compelling to me because I clearly have some critical mass of schizoid traits to some significant degree, and yeah.
And you would say they would culminate enough to feel comfortable saying that there's a great likelihood that this is the quote unquote PD that you might have been dealing for a significant amount of time.
Yes, I would.
Um, what before we get into the schizoid specific type stuff, I do want to ask, what interests do you have? If somebody were to ask, what are you into? And it could be what would you tell people, and what are you actually into if you don't actually tell people normally?
Aha. Well, I would tell people that I'm interested in art and music and nature and biology and wildlife, psychology, philosophy, history. Um, I like going outdoors and doing things that don't necessarily involve other people. Uh, I might not necessarily say that to everybody off the bat in those terms, right? What I might not necessarily say to people is that I'm interested in pretty much anything that's unusual will spark my interest, even if I don't necessarily want to partake in it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if it is weird at all, I will watch a documentary or read about it, and it will be probably be fascinating to me. With that said, I've had some interest and some experience with the occult and esoteric stuff. So, yeah.
All right. Yeah, that's not uncommon amongst the Zoids, esoteric interests and niche interests that they kind of keep to themselves or keep private. I'm guessing there's been interactions in which this was brought up and it maybe didn't go well, or is it just kind of a this is mine and this is my thing that I keep to myself type deal?
Uh, a little from column A and a little from column B.
Mhm.
Um, I would say that it stands to reason just from knowing how most people are about anything that is off of the usual topics that I'm
Yeah.
not about to bring that up with like upon meeting my new neighbor or something like that, right? So
Hmm.
yeah.
How would you mind saying your age?
I am 38.
38. Okay, so you're
Yeah.
part of this similar club as myself, being a
Yeah.
40-year-old. You're almost there, the big 40, right?
Yeah.
As if,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Pushing 40. Yeah.
Nothing changes. It's the same thing.
I'm
Um,
sure of it.
all right. So now that we have a little bit of an understanding of what kind of stuff interests you, what would you say you spend most of your days and nights doing?
Most of my days and nights. Well, I spend a lot of my time at work. I work uh, a kind of a solitary job that's it seems like my working experiences in various fields and at different places have kind of narrowed down to that. It seems like that's what suits me best.
It's interesting.
And yeah, and my days, well, I spend a lot of the time making art and researching anything that's interesting to me, listening to podcasts and just intellectual and creative pursuits mainly.
Sure. What sort of creative pursuits do you pursue?
All kinds, but my whole life it's mainly been visual art. I just had gravitated towards drawing and found out that I had some talent at a young age, and it kind of snowballed from there. And dabbled in all of the other creative fields, writing and acting and
Acting.
theater and just a little bit of dance too. And yeah,
Mhm. Some of those activities sound like they kind of require people, right? Like dancing. I mean, not dancing necessarily, but acting. Unless you're doing monologues, I guess. um, which is fine too. Uh,
yeah, that's true. And I'm often coming up with like monologues and soliloquies just kind of out of my own world just to
mhm,
humor myself. It's just, just speaking to the
yeah.
way that my brain kind of works like that.
Do you ever find yourself like merely like imagining the other person you're acting with, like their lines, and then you responding to them?
Absolutely. Yeah. Whole
Mhm.
conversations, whole back and forths, like really Gollum style. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. It's just this is curious because I think I used to do some of this as well, but not for acting purposes, probably more for just like trying to like work out scenarios sometimes, like how I would function or what I could do or what might be said and how I would respond. Um, and it's usually pre-interaction so that I had like, three or four responses ready for certain possibilities to occur. But anyway, um, and you said your nights are when you work, correct?
I work swing shifts starting in the late afternoon and until midnight. Yeah.
Um, would you be able to state the general field that it is? Because it's interesting you said that it all culminated into it. Um, I know a lot of Zoids do security. I know a lot of Zoids do remote work that's can be done overnight, things like that.
Yeah, I am a security guard. I was
Okay.
I was looking up I was looking up a little short feature on Schizoid
Yeah, it's a common job.
recently, and it mentioned that you would probably have a job like a nighttime security guard,
Yeah.
and that's exactly what I'm doing. So that was interesting.
Yeah, you're not the only schizoid I've talked to that does that kind of security work, just because it's isolated and Zoids tend to have, not always, but a lot of them tend to have inconsistent or unconventional sleeping schedules. So, so it tends to be a little easier for them to do that kind of stuff for a lot of reasons. Um,
Mhm.
Especially if that job, a lot of those jobs can be a little bit lax during certain times of the day. So it lets you pursue things like listening to podcasts and stuff like that. I'm guessing. I don't know. Depends on the where you work. Um, So, when did you hear about Schizoid PD, and when did it click for you? Like, how long ago was it, and when did it click for you? Like, oh shit, this is it. Like, I've been looking at the psych stuff for a while, and I just came, I found this finally. I sat down and looked at it and was like, oh,
About 6 weeks ago.
mhm.
Yeah.
Tell
It's
us.
really it's really astounding to me that I had somehow missed it before, but I also thought that about realizing that I'd been autistic my whole life 5 years ago. So,
Mhm.
yeah,
Is oh so is this oh okay, so you discovered that you were autistic 5 years ago, and but
that's
in the
correct.
pro
Yeah.
okay, but in the process, actually this is deserves a follow-up question. When you found out about the autism, did you ever attempt to reach out to those types of groups or places or anything like that, and or people, and then also found the same kind of barriers to entry when it came to like communication or wanting communication with them?
I have, as far as like joining groups or meetups, I did a local online group meeting thing there for a while. And I don't know if I would necessarily say, I mean, I'd probably say that I had some of the same barriers to communication that I just experience in general with people in the world, and sometimes maybe not so much necessarily. And there's more like I don't know, weirdo stuff to relate to, or
Mhm.
yeah, but
So it was
it,
a
it
little
it
easier when it was autistic people you were interacting with.
you know I wish that I could say that it was.
Mm.
Honestly, I would have to say for those meetups that it my experience was more like it kind of came with its own set of challenges. Um, I will
Yeah.
say, however, that it seems like in retrospect, a lot of the people who I gravitated towards, as far as friends and acquaintances and even girlfriends, were neurodivergent in some way. The best friend that I ever had was more visibly and apparently autistic than I was, but yeah.
Yeah, that's also not terribly uncommon. Got like all my junk out. But yeah, like I feel like some of the people along the way growing up myself, like might have been neurodivergent, the ones that I kind of temporarily clicked with until, I stopped clicking. Um so what about some of the negative symptoms about having this situation, or like things like anhedonia, avolition, and some of the other various negative symptoms that are described that troubles you the most or gives you the most trouble, or previously maybe didn't give you so much trouble when you were younger, but as time progressed became a problem?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think that really in the last several years, particularly since probably about 2020, I would say that my SPD kind of symptoms have really kind of metastasized in a way, but it's like I always had some base consistency of it,
Hmm.
and uh, of course it was also um, not a particularly strong sense of it, just because I had never had a reference point for it before so
Yeah.
much. And we're just kind of swimming in the waters of, well, just keep your nose to the grindstone, and I'm sure that your personality will even out as you grow older, and like just kind of hearing stuff like that along the way, but
Yeah.
always knowing that there's something pervasively underlying your experience with things. And
Hmm.
of course, coming to terms with realizing that I had been autistic my whole life, that was a big part of understanding, like gaining some kind of a context and a reference for that. And I feel like this uh, recently is kind of like another level of kind of the same phenomena going on, if that answers your question.
No, yeah,
Um,
well, yeah, I mean, that was all very interesting, but I'm curious to what like negative symptom was like is the one that's messing with you the most. Like, what sort of negative symptoms do you deal with, and which are, It could be. It doesn't have to be schizoid specific. It could be anxiety, panic, depression, or anhedonia, which is the inability to enjoy things that you sometimes can't enjoy, stuff like that.
Got it. Well, I had experienced some neuroticism since I was very young. Kind of had a really sensitive and empathetic and kind of a neurotic predisposition since I was very young,
Hmm.
uh, evidently. So that was that's always been there. Um, I've had ups and downs in my life just like anybody else has, but there's that. Um, I would say that one of the main negative experiences of it is just how much it kind of shapes and limits uh, the way that I navigate the world and with other people, because there's just, I guess, just a general sense of not necessarily getting on with most people in the way that most people can, I
Hmm.
suppose. Um, I have very limited interests. That's one thing that's really big for me. Seeing all the traits of this is that it does seem to me like there's really only a few things in the recent years that I get a lot of pleasure from and I'm very interested in, and things that most people can have some interest in, like I can't have any interest in it at all, and so it makes it difficult to relate to people, and it's a strain on a lot of relationships.
What would you say? What's an example of some of those things that you get no pleasure from? If anything, maybe are aversive to that most people would not be.
One thing I am baffled by how common it is, how common sports fandom is. I
Hmm.
cannot possibly be interested in sitting through a sports game and paying attention to what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Anything particular about it? Um, is it just the actions of the athletes, or is there other elements?
you know, I'm not even like particularly averse to it, other than maybe like a lot of loud noise and overstimulating environments, like to be in a sports arena.
Mhm.
But um, it's just like this feeling like I'd definitely always rather be doing something else. I would always rather be painting or researching something uh, unusual
Mhm.
or otherwise just really interesting.
What if it's
Yeah.
an unusual sport? Might pique your interest.
I guess that's kind of true. I mean, like the only kind of sports, I mean, just to consider the sport that the Mayans used to play where they
Mhm.
would hit a ball with their hip and it was like an
Crazy
all
stuff.
rubber ball through a hoop that was uh oriented uh vertically as opposed to a horizontal basketball
Hmm.
hoop. Like that's pretty interesting to think about. I've never tried it. Seems pretty hard. I just a little bit of like back and forth, like frisbee or maybe disc golf. Those things are kind of more relaxing too.
Hmm. So
Yeah.
is it the team element?
Um,
Like, does
Not.
golf sound more interesting to you than baseball, for example?
Yeah, I guess so. Although I was never interested in golf either. I've never played golf. I played mini golf. That's kind of
Yeah, like
relaxing.
I like mini golf mostly
Yeah, that's all
because
right.
the weird kind of uncanniness of the locations
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the weird oddly shaped like animals and things that you have to like you know it's just like a lot of really strange arbitrary nonsense and it's amusing. So
Yeah, I
um
dig it. I dig it for sure.
yeah, yeah. um okay, let's move on to some questions about other people. How would you describe your feelings or lack thereof when interacting with others?
When interacting with others, well,
Hmm.
I mean,
At
for
various levels, you can go into it.
Yeah. So, and that's one thing about me is like when somebody asks me like a general question like that, I
Hmm.
feel like my brain fires off in so many different directions at the same time with it.
Hmm.
And I honestly want to ask the person like, what do you mean by that? And it's just not conducive to like having a conversation, getting on
Well,
with
you can do
somebody.
that
But
now. It's conducive to
yeah,
having a conversation with me.
yeah, yeah. But like how would I describe how I interact with people? I mean, one of the first things that comes to mind among the different things that come to mind is that upon hearing that question is that I am sometimes kind of baffled, actually not only like bored and annoyed with small talk, but I'm actually baffled at like the fundamental basis of it
Mhm.
just a bit.
Like,
And
yeah.
I just have a really hard time with it. And I just like somebody will want to talk to me about something as if it's in earnest that just leaves me wondering like why that would be noteworthy at all to talk about. But and it's interesting because I think it's kind of the same thing, or it would be the same thing with them were I to um get right into, I don't know, like a philosophical question or some
Hmm.
kind of like a something requiring deeper thought or something that would just be innately more interesting to me.
Yeah, somebody else would probably think like, "Why are you bringing that up out of nowhere? That's weird."
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
I
yeah,
figured it out when I was pretty young. I didn't really continue, you know. So
but
yeah.
what's amusing is that you find the kind of more conventional small talk questions just as baffling as to why they're even being asked as they might find why your questions are being asked at that given moment as well.
Yeah, it seems like to me, yeah.
So like, so if someone stood next to you and they said, "Hey, so what kind of car do you drive?"
How would I answer?
I mean, sure. Would you just tell
Oh,
them?
okay. Yeah. Yeah, I would. I'd tell them what kind of car I drive.
Well, internally, what would be going on?
What kind of car do I drive? Well, let's see. Um, like I might be more fine with that and like like
Cars?
talk about like not even cars so much, but like what it's like to be in the car and to drive the car. And like, you know, when I bring up like my aversion to small talk, people will be like, um, you mean like people trying to talk about the weather? And it's funny
Mm.
because like the weather can actually be, I don't know, all right enough to talk about. So I guess it's not all small talk, but you know,
I
weather is
think
a scientific phenomenon.
I'm trying
Weather
to
is
think of
something that
small
affects
talk
us
that
all.
you're
But
more referring to. Would it be more like, "Oh man, it's been a rough day today. Whew.
it sure has, Jim.
Yep, a lot of stuff going
I
on this
yeah,
weekend."
yeah, sure is. It's kind of weird. Like I don't know why we're really talking on this level, but okay. I
You
mean,
know,
I don't know. Like
yeah, I get it.
it
Probably
kind of
more stuff
occurs
like
to
that.
me. It kind of occurs to me almost, you know, upon wondering about it, like maybe people are more just oriented toward constantly connecting at some level rather than no
Hmm.
level. I mean, you know.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, it might be something like that. I've read stuff on how like small talk is literally just like like a evolved version of a threat assessment.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
really compelling. Yeah, yeah. I'm really fascinated with evolutionary psychology and how a lot of it speaks to the brutality of the Paleolithic human past and
Hmm.
how people survive or people evolved to survive each other more than anything else, mainly.
Yeah.
And a lot of our basis of interaction and our brains are oriented toward that.
Yeah, but yeah, that's what's interesting. That's kind of how I like view it now when people like approach me or I've been approached with small talk like that. Like say in a situation where I'm gonna have to sit next to them for like a few minutes or whatever it is. Like I'm perfectly fine sitting down saying nothing, but they'll engage in the small talk. So now I just interpret it as, oh, they're just doing like a threat assessment, even if they don't know it. So then I'll just be friendly about it, and then that kind of like makes them more comfortable. But the only problem with that is they might engage in further conversation. So, uh, but
Yeah.
it's right, right. Have you ever been caught up in that one where you answer kind of amicably, but then it just keeps going? Get caught in that
Yeah.
trap.
Yeah, I worked at a place a few years ago where there were just a few people who had a hard time taking a hint, and some people were very attuned to hints, and they didn't push anything beyond um, the initial impressions. So, um,
That's
yeah,
good.
yeah.
Okay. Um, would you describe yourself as being kind to other people?
That's interesting. Feel like I am. I feel like I'm mainly I feel an attempt to be decent and courteous, and I don't know. I might be a bit too reserved to be considered kind,
Hmm.
unless like an opportunity arose
Yeah.
to help somebody out in need or something like that.
How do you react to that
Um,
sort of situation usually?
a situation
Which somebody is in
where
need
somebody's in need.
of some kind. It
Uh,
doesn't have to be life or death, you know.
Yeah, I would help. I would feel inclined to help them. I have a history of kind of like a codependent tendency to like in the past. I would have perhaps this is bizarrely contradicting SPD traits, but in any case,
No,
I have
there's a
I
lot of contradictions within SPD, so it's interesting.
yeah. Okay, interesting. That I had kind of codependent leanings in the past, in as much as if I would notice somebody in emotional suffering, I would feel really bothered by it, like I really wanted to do something about it. And that comes
Hmm.
to mind with the question of how do you react when somebody is in need? And I've learned through experience, and through just learning about it, that um, I don't necessarily need to do that, and that people really kind of need to go through their own process with things, and that, you know, emotional turmoil is a part of people's lives. And
Of
so,
course.
yeah, that comes to mind. Yeah.
So that's kind of what you process. So depending on your answer to in your mind to the question of is this need, do I need to be involved in this need? Am I the only person available? Um, do you like measure those things in order to make a decision to involve yourself or not?
Yes, yes. And in my working capacity, of course, nothing is happening most of the time, but I'm there in case somebody is in need, or maybe just at least the property itself is in need. So I do take that seriously, and I'm attuned to what's going on at work
Mm-hmm.
uh, there. So yeah, I feel well oriented toward my security capacity.
So you would say you have a pretty high, what do they call it? Spatial awareness and all that. Like, is that the right word? Situational awareness. There you go. I think it
Yeah, it
is.
made me think more of situational awareness. Yeah.
Yeah, that's.
Uh yes and no. That's an interesting one. I
Hmm.
mean, I'm so cerebrally inclined. I don't know if I could say like that I would be a great as far as being
Hopefully, you're not zoning out while people
like
are
like a
robbing
like
the
a like a
place.
like like a Navy SEAL situation or something like that,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
what if I got lost in my own thoughts just a little bit too much and then missed the mark with something. So yeah.
yeah. Gotcha, gotcha. So, is that a common for you? Just kind of zoning out into your own thoughts for periods of time?
Yeah, it always has been pretty much like I was reviewed as my time in preschool. I've been told since then that I had reported that my favorite time was nap time because it's the only time that I get to think my own thoughts. And I think
Nice.
that's pretty
Base
funny.
base kid.
Yeah, I think that's pretty funny in retrospect because I don't remember saying that or thinking that, but it sounds like pretty much my whole life experience. Like I like to be alone with my thoughts a lot more often than a lot of people are about to allow me to, or at least they when I was in when I was in school.
Yeah.
Yeah, wasn't into school.
No, no, I actually that's interesting because well, before we get into some of that in particular, I want to know if you could change anything about how other people interact with you, even if it's like absurd, what would it be?
Um, I guess off the top of my head, I guess I would just say, just if they just understood and had an understanding of not taking it personally, that my needs for human interaction, like I have some need for it like anybody else does, it's just very markedly different than other people's. And like my cup is full pretty fast, generally speaking, when it comes to just the public or acquaintances at work or something like that. And I'm perfectly fine with it up to a point. It's just it's not as common of a point as other people, I think, maybe.
What I'm curious when you say that is like, would you describe like what if somebody just said, "Oh, you're not a schizoid, you're just an introvert." Like, what would you
Uh-huh.
say is the major difference there? Like, what would you say is like, no, it's a lot more than just being introverted.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. That's like the critical distinction that I've made with this recently. So, of course, I had considered myself an introvert since I was pretty young, since I was, long before even understanding that I was autistic or anything like that.
Mhm.
But it's been really curious to me for a few years now, particularly that this main persistent curiosity with me was that I've noticed that for the past few years, I just had kind of a precipitous drop off in a real interest in other people in the same way, you know? And it kind of reminded me of, and it's just that it was curious to me because it's clearly like an aberrant psychological profile, but I didn't understand exactly what it was. And I heard this term and I looked up the traits and it's checking off some of the boxes and it's very curious. But it makes me think of there's a movie, A Beautiful Mind, about this guy who is he suffers from schizophrenia. And I myself am not schizophrenic. I don't have paranoid delusions or hallucinations or anything like that. But in any case, he is being told that the people who are real to him and who accompany him and pervasively in his everyday life are not real and they're not really there. And I'm going to draw a parallel here, so please bear with me. But you know, when people tell him this, he looks at them and he sees them and he's like, well, I don't see what the problem is. I see them right there. And it's only after years of being familiar with them that he realizes that something is off because one of them is a young girl and she hasn't grown up in years. And so he starts to realize logically at the objective level that there's something different going on here. And so while of course my experience is not nearly as extreme, um, that's kind of the parallel that comes to mind.
And insofar as what exactly, what is it paralleling when it comes to your
Because
experience?
it's just like I realize that it's been years. So it's one thing to go through a period of weeks or months where you're maybe not as interested in other people and you're more withdrawn, but to go through it for several years, like something different is going on. It seems
Mm.
to me. And
Yeah,
I
and
went to I went to therapy uh, trying to learn more about this, and I had recognized that that is also a symptom of post traumatic stress disorder. And
Hmm.
so I went to therapy kind of recently, a few months ago. Um, Not for the first time or anything, but I went there that time specifically to get curious about the possibility of me having post-traumatic stress disorder and what it means and what I can do about it, what I might have to accept about it because I can't do anything about it. But yeah, just going from there.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring
And
up the P. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, pardon me. And it that's really curious to me that I would come around to getting curious about the possibility of having PTSD
Hmm.
because I'm not I kind of have more contrarian um feelings about the recent, I guess, kind of zeitgeist around trauma being spoken about, and I don't so much identify myself with being a snowflake, but when I had seen that uh these and a few others are symptoms of PTSD, it was curious to me.
So you're saying that like when you say snowflake, you mean like a sensitive person or a highly sensitive person?
No, I actually no. That's funny and that's interesting. I do identify like I know that I am a highly sensitive person.
Oh,
I
okay.
I
Just
I
trying to
do have
differentiate what you meant.
uh,
That's all.
excuse me. I guess by a snowflake I mean like one of these people who is extremely identified with um their
They're
trauma
oh, and
and
it
and
becomes a part of
and
something. They,
and
yeah.
using it as a fallback for understanding themselves in terms of everything else, in the context of
Mm.
everything else,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
yeah, that whole
I'm
thing.
I'm traumatized because of this thing. So thus, everything about me, including my negative behaviors, are to be understood or excused through that lens or something, right?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
kind of stuff.
Yeah, I feel like I value awareness and compassion for the self, and I also value resilience and grit. So yeah.
Yeah, same, same. Um, Now we're gonna go down some heavier stuff a little bit. Okay.
Oh
So,
man.
yep. So can you give me a basic rundown of your childhood, major notes, good times and bad? Like what stands out?
Well, first thing that comes to mind is, as I had mentioned, that I had a pretty sensitive disposition, empathic, and um, I would have pretty major episodes of depression when I
Hmm.
was pretty young, and um, there was also anxiety, but it was mainly the depression when I was a kid. And that's always been interesting to me because I didn't have particularly depressing circumstances, but I had
Hmm.
a lot going on in my internal world, I guess I would say,
Yeah.
from since I was a little kid. But I grew up with generous, supportive, middle class parents who took me to kids therapy and um, treated my mental health problem. But um,
But
it's
it still didn't cut it apparently, right?
yeah, yeah. It's interesting that I've seen in my recent research about this, just a little bit of research about this, that there's a common childhood experience of being too infringed on and too intruded on as a
Hmm.
kid, and developing this personality around a lack of understanding that you can negotiate your relationships. And I try to think back on it, and I'd have to say that I don't really see so much of that. And I think
Hmm.
that if anything, my parents probably erred a bit on the side of permissiveness and like lack
Hmm.
of any kind of rigid scrutiny or routine or
Hmm.
anything like that. And
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's why well, a lot of the theories regarding how this develops um uh I think are always missing an important component, and that's the neurodivergency aspect that isn't being included really when it's being discussed in regards to a sensitive child that would have ended up developing this PD, because it would ultimately, you could still have circumstances in which that neurodivergent child undergoes a significant amount of stress and incredibly stressful, even traumatic occurrences that wouldn't be recognized as such outside of the mind of that child as it's occurring. Um, and so it doesn't really carry over too well into adulthood as being viewed as something traumatic, even if it was, or a sense of consistent neglect for things that even good parents couldn't recognize um, due to a lack of knowledge or maybe a lack of metacognition um, or just circumstance. But nonetheless, right, this kind of stuff builds up. Yeah, but I have done some reading on like the connections between like ideas of Zoid stuff and complex PTSD. It's like a slow drip of consistent like traumatic environment that might not even be like what you would conventionally think is a traumatic environment, right? Like going to the as an autistic child, going to I don't know, I'd assume I'm not autistic, but going to like a loud carnival with clowns and rides that your parents tell you to just, it's okay, you'll be fine, just get on it. I'll get on with you, and you know things of that nature that would be considered fun might have not been for you know that particular child. In fact, it might have been the opposite. But anyway, I'm rambling. What
Oh, very interesting. Very interesting.
what changes or things do you think could have helped you growing up? This is something I brought up in the stream I did recently, but I guess a good way to word this question is if you knew about you as a child, but that child was like a different child, what kind of stuff would do you think would benefit that child so that maybe they would have been more or less, you know, disconnected growing up?
I think that any inkling, any suggestion of the possibility of being on the autistic spectrum would have helped tremendously. And, you know, as much help as I got for my issues as a kid, I don't remember it ever coming up, ever. And I know apparently that's common for a lot of people who are recently discovering
Mm-hmm.
themselves as having been autistic their whole lives, who were sort of in my age range,
Yeah.
kids who were growing up in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, pre the whole kind of more neurodivergent sort of awareness and stuff like that. Pre
Mm-hmm.
that kind of stuff. It would be like, oh, if you didn't, you know, have severe learning disabilities, then oh, you're just a weird sensitive kid with um, idiosyncratic behaviors that we can't define as anything. That probably would have been like more of a '90s, early 2000 take, um, or '80s as well. All right. So, what does your relationship with your memories look like now? When it comes to your childhood memories, whether they're positive or negative, what is your relationship with them?
Well, I'm a very nostalgic person. I really enjoy the vibes and the aesthetics of things that I enjoyed when I was a kid. I really enjoy like having a look back at the kind of cartoons that were playing back then, and
Mhm.
horror movies from the late from the 80s and the 90s, particularly the first half of the 90s. Yeah.
So it's you have a good, it's a good like well, you have a strong relationship with your childhood memories insofar as nostalgia is what you're saying.
Um with nostalgia
Is it usually stuff, not
and
people, or
um it well, you know, the first thing that came to mind was like the vibes or the aesthetics, you know, to sense the things again, to see the
mhm,
aesthetics of the quality again. And then, you know, secondary that came after that made me think of my relationship with my best friend who I grew up about a mile away from, and would walk back and forth to their house and kind of grew up with him. It makes me think of the neighborhood that I grew up in. Um, I I do, when I think about it, when I look back, I clearly I remember that I was pretty messed up in my own internal world as far as depression and anxiety, like I could be, for sure. Um, so both the good and the bad come to mind. Yeah,
And okay, so you can connect to those memories to
yeah,
some degree.
yeah. But
Okay.
it's interesting. Like I didn't have really very um, I don't know, like really bad memories, of
Hmm.
like being abused or anything like that.
Hmm. Would you say you have more bad memories about just kind of I think you described it as like kind of neuroticism or like internal struggles?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, we're gonna get a little heavier here. More.
All
Okay.
right. This level.
All right. What is the ideal way you could show love to another person that would feel tolerable to yourself and you hope fulfilling to the other person?
The ideal way to show love to another person.
That's tolerable for you and would hopefully fulfill them, or if circumstances would be nice if it would fulfill them.
Well, are we talking about romantic love here or friendship or like,
We can cover both, or just we
yeah,
can start with friendship.
okay. Um, I I guess that it would be ideal if I could be this different without being judged for it. And if I just felt comfortable to express myself to them, to express my love to them. Um,
How would what would be the most comfortable way to do that? Express your care or affection for them.
um, just to feel it and to know that they feel it and to have the overall sense of that. It's coming to mind. I have a good friend who I recently saw for the first time in a couple of years. We don't talk very much, but when we do, we're really fascinated with each other, and we're kind of an open book with each other. And she's probably neurodivergent too, and I get the sense that she's not into hugs, and I'm perfectly fine with that. Um, I I like them if the other person is comfortable with them. Since she's not, I'm perfectly fine with it. I understand. I get it. And
Interesting.
we have a bond that is very much on the basis of like ideas and talking about things, but
Hmm.
there's also like a level of care and love and affection there that doesn't need to be um necessarily demonstrated in any kind of traditional way, even
Or like
up to,
validated in any
yeah,
traditional way.
yeah, even up to and including like hugging each other. Yeah. And we'll hit each other up once in a year when she's coming around for her optometrist appointment coming into town. So yeah.
Well, what's your deal when it comes to the other kind of love, the romantic love? Is that something you're about, or
It is. um I guess in recent years, I do have a girlfriend, by the way. It's worth noting. Um, in recent years, I see romantic love itself as something that it's either for kids or you have to grow up and it kind of transforms into something more practical and kind of daily, kind of like an everyday kind of a thing.
Hmm.
Yeah. I would say that I am an experienced romantic as opposed to a hopeless romantic. Like when I was young, I was very romantic and would have very dramatic and very big feelings in this whole internal churning world of them. And I don't feel the same way about it anymore. I feel that love, I do romantically love, but um
Did,
it's not
did,
the same. It's
did
not the
you
same as it used to be.
did you ever
Thank
did you
God.
ever love others romantically, but it was like a facsimile of a person that you created in your mind of them?
Don't we all?
Well, yeah, but
Is
where
is
like
it
you would
is it
actually like be aware that, well, I mean, I don't know if you were aware of it, or like when it didn't meet the standard, would that cause disruption?
Yeah, I mean, my first relationship I ever had when I was 18, that was incredibly tumultuous. It was incredibly, um, yeah, a lot of fighting because we weren't meeting each other. I'd have to say that I was the more dramatic one in that relationship because she wasn't meeting my expectations of what a romantic relationship might be, and I
Hmm.
think that she was more jaded than me.
Interesting. Oh, okay. Um, Let me see here. We got two more questions, and we gotta wrap it up here because it has been going for a while, as interesting as it is. If you didn't have to worry about people, I'm sorry, if you didn't have to worry about people's constant concerns that you feel that do not concern you, what sort of life would you imagine you would like to live?
If people's concerns did not concern me, what kind of a life?
No, if the concerns other people have that you're kind of forced to be concerned about that you actually aren't internally concerned over, if you were free of that, of those obligations, those types of things, um, what kind of life would you lead?
I might just pursue creativity and intellectual pursuits just even more. Just devote a lot more of my time to it.
Okay. So, but what would that be as a life? I mean, like you would dedicate more time to it, sure, but like, would you still be doing security?
Um, I wonder. I might. I'm yeah. I mean, I just might. Sometimes I think that I might be an actor, but of course that it's just that it involves people to a greater degree. And so, doing a play is one thing and sustaining an entire lifetime career of it is another, right? So, yeah, it's a dilemma.
Interesting. All right. Here's the last one. Could you describe a positive feeling or any feeling about interacting with people that are not like yourself necessarily, but live through that similar schizoid lens? So I don't know how many schizoids you actually sat down and had conversations with, whether it's online or maybe this is one of your first. Um, I'd like to know how, or even hearing about the experiences of other schizoids. Does what does that feel like? Is it calming? Is it relatable? Are you ambivalent?
A lot of it is relatable. A lot of it's really compellingly relatable, and it seems to serve as a frame of reference for how I am and how I experience these things. Yeah. I really appreciate everybody who actually talks about it. And of course, it stands to reason that a lot of us don't necessarily ever talk about it or, go on any kind of a public forum with that.
Mm.
and that there are more of us than we know.
Yeah, there probably are. I mean, if my thoughts are correct about it being mostly disaffective neurodivergence, I'm guessing there's probably a good chunk of them. We're probably going to find more and more of them. People are going to blame it. There's probably going to be more people like going that there's going to be an uptick in people getting this kind of diagnosis over the next few years, and I guarantee you, it's just going to get blamed on the internet, which is really amusing to me because it's the internet that's actually allowing them to discover that this thing that they feel completely alienated about for most of their life exists. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
um, but yeah, I guess I think it was a few years ago. It was Eleanor Greenberg had said that like right now is a pretty decent time or the age of the schizoid because you can do so much without actually having to be next to anybody in person. Um, okay. Is there anything else you would like to share? Anything? Any advice? How about this? Any advice you could give since you're on the older side, like me, or middle-aged side? Um, any advice you would give to Zoids out there in their 20s that maybe they're masking more, maybe they're progressively feeling more and more disconnected and number to a lot of things. Like any advice you would give?
Well, I would say that, if it's compelling to somebody like that, to hear more of this kind of a frame of reference for understanding themselves, to continue pursuing this, to continue pursuing that, measuring it against your own life and figuring out what it means for you. What kind of a job might you need to have? Because it's like I'd said earlier, like I feel like a lot of my life and my younger life was, I don't know, like almost kind of like stolen away from me just because of this. Um, there's kind of a pervasive sense pushed in among people, that it's like, oh, you'll even out. If you just force yourself to be a normal person, then you'll just kind of turn into a normal person,
Yeah,
which is kind of true
that's
in a horrifying way. But like, it's
you.
ultimately
You'll
not
adapt
really.
to being
Yeah,
around normal
yeah,
people, but you
yeah,
won't become a normal person,
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like,
a regular
to the younger
person.
people, I would say in short that it's been amazing the things that have changed in my life, and it's been amazing the things that have not changed in my life. The preferences and kind of personality traits that have always been there. That, so we got to be ourselves no matter what it means for us. So let's figure out what it means for us and become reconciled with that, and to, maybe have very straightforward conversations with the people who are closest to us if it causes trouble with them. Like I said, like it's just it's kind of it's hard to get around how it can create some tension. It can create some misunderstandings,
Yeah.
um, particularly with like an intimate partner. Um, so yeah, it's just, to explain to those people that it's nothing personal, and that
Mhm.
there is a greater frame of reference for what this whole phenomena is.
Well, awesome. That was well said. In any case, thanks to everybody watching. Thank you for Zoid for joining me and answering these questions. If anybody is interested in seeing more of these, I will be posting them. I planned on first recording a few before starting to post them, just to kind of see how the questions go and what happens. And I don't know, it's been an interesting adventure for myself as well. Um, if you want to support the channel, if you want to support what I do, please, Patreon is great, probably the best way to do it, and PayPal as well. I stopped, for those that you didn't notice, I stopped doing Twitch. Nobody's watching me there. I'm just going to stick to YouTube. And yes, I will keep this channel demonetized as well because I hate ads and I hate how YouTube handles money. Okay, thanks a lot again for Gazoid. If if you haven't joined the server, please do so. Apply on there, and it might be something interesting.
Thanks so
But
much for having me, and thanks for the work that you do.
um, I won't say you're welcome, but I will say I'm glad it helped.
All right.
Uh, and as usual, everybody, when day is dark, always remember happy day.